Hey folks, welcome to the channel. This is where we explore the very edges of imaging informatics. My name is Jason. I'm traveling, so I'm doing this from a forest today. And we're going to dive into the world of integrating the healthcare enterprise, also known as IHE. My special guest today is David Kwan. David is a leading expert in healthcare IT. He's a prominent figure in the IHE community. He's the chair of IHE Canada. And if that wasn't good enough, he's also a really good friend of mine. If you're interested in discussions about imaging informatics, medical standards like DICOM, HL7, and the IHE framework, be sure to subscribe. We'll be exploring a lot more topics and going in depth on this channel. So David is an imaging informaticist. He's keen to share his deep knowledge and insights on IHE and its role in healthcare interoperability. So if you've ever wondered about the standards and the frameworks that power our digital healthcare systems, this conversation is a must-watch. In this chat, we trace the history and the evolution of IHE. We look at the motivations behind its creation and the significant impact it's had on healthcare. David will shed light on the critical part IHE plays in enabling seamless communication and integration across various healthcare IT systems. From digitizing paper records to the latest advancements in AI emerging standards, we cover it all. David will also provide practical examples and real-world cases to make these complex topics easy to understand. So don't miss the chance to learn from one of the best. And just a note, I am traveling, so my sound quality wasn't the best, but the content is rich. And don't forget, hit that subscribe button and like. Hope you enjoy.
Well, thank you very much, David, for joining me today. David is the principal of Insignia Consulting and also the chair of IHE Canada. And today we're going to have a conversation about IHE. And so, David, I wanted to start by, well, maybe a little walk back through history. So in the 70s, we had the work that began to start HL7. And then in the 80s, we had ACR and NEMA teaming up that would become DICOM. So we had these two pivotal standards in medical imaging. And then much later on, late 90s, IHE comes around. And so why did it take so late, and what was the purpose that IHE was trying to address while we had these two standards in play?
Sure. First off, thanks for inviting me. Love to talk about IHE. And basically, you've asked a question, a little bit of history of IHE. It evolved out of DICOM, because DICOM was supposed to be a standard that enabled the exchange of image data, basically pixel data. And we have to remember, back in those days, it was mainly radiology. And it was just beginning to be digital. And then we were, working on CT images. At that time, CT images was probably the most, it was 2 and 4 slice at that time. And it was very small image sets at that time. And we thought that they were huge back then. But what we were finding as PACS was starting to grow, that we were having problems in exchanging these simple images like CRs not only between PACS systems, but even between different legacies of the same manufacturer. Take for instance, you had an older CT and you wanted to see comparison images on a more modern CT. We were finding that even then, because everything was proprietary in those days. And then that's why DICOM took hold. So DICOM is agreeing on what is the format and syntax of how you exchange that pixel data, and it evolved into incorporating some HL7 data fields into DICOM fields, and then that became the patient data and the metadata. So what happened is, as we were working more and more towards using DICOM, we also ran into similar things with HL7. As you know, today, with HL7 version 2, there's 23 versions of HL7 version 2. And slowly the industry is moving into HL7 Fire. So, in order to have supportive legacy systems, you have to understand what all those versions mean. I know with DICOM, there's only DICOM version 3, but still there's legacy data. So you have to understand. So that's the standard. The standards are very strong when it comes to EMR data or health information systems data, and that's the HL7 realm. But when it comes to pixel data, it's going to be DICOM. So back in the 90s, as PACS was being deployed everywhere, there were a lot of problems in trying to get, especially between manufacturers, understanding of what the data was, and you had interoperability problems. I view it as this: even though you have a standard like DICOM, which is probably the most successful medical standard out there, because most radiology or medical imaging uses DICOM of some flavor. So it is, in terms of adoption, it is way up there in terms of a medical standard. But you still don't have interoperability. The question was, why do we have that? Well, IHE was created by informaticists and radiologists. Basically, it was HIMSS and RSNA coming together, creating a partnership organization called Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise. And the reason for that, and it's one of the largest strengths of IHE today, is IHE approaches every problem or new profile or challenge from a clinical perspective, which means it's a clinical use case. It's a clinical problem today, and clinicians present it to IHE and they say, this is what we're having problems with. And IHE uses technology. And when I say technology, what it does is it uses current standards to address those problems. A lot of times it is a communication problem in that, who are the systems or actors? We call them actors in IHE. It's basically a information system or an application that we put the label actor to. The actor has a defined set of requirements or responsibilities, is another way to look at it, in that it does this. Along with those actors are a specified set of transactions. Those transactions are the communications between systems.
Maybe that's a good point for me to ask another question here. So if someone's new to IHE, they're just dipping their toes in it, and maybe they've downloaded an IHE profile, and they're looking at a specific profile, and they've come across an actor. And so the first thing I might notice is I don't see the word PACS, I don't see RIS or EMR, and I see these kind of non-prescriptive words like image manager, image archive, or order filler. So can you expand on that a little bit more about why do we see these less prescriptive names in the integration statements?
So they are less prescriptive, but they're defined, they're specified. They're specified, as I said, there's responsibilities that are like image manager has a defined set of responsibilities that it has and roles. There's a role assigned to it. There's responsibilities. There's a set of transactions that are deemed mandatory. So in order to pass as an IHE actor, as an image display, it has to be able to support these transactions or these responsibilities. There's also options. So, it's optional whether they should do that or not. What happens with options is that usually it ensures that you have a higher functionality. So it's an option there. It's deemed it's probably something that is new, and that's why we put option on sometimes on some things like responsibilities or actors or what it has to do. So the one thing that I want to draw your attention to is there's in an IHE profile, there is a sequence of events, and a lot of times it runs concurrently with other actors or other transactions as well, and it's almost orchestrated. And the reason for that is because we want an optimal workflow. So, and this leads back to why we don't have prescriptive. We don't want to call it a PACS, and we call it an image manager, because a lot of times a PACS does multiple things. It just happens. Image manager is one of the things that it acts.
I think a good example of that is DICOM modality worklist, where the order filler is going to provide the information as a result of the C-find from the modality, but that order filler could be the risk, but it doesn't always have to be. And in many implementations, it's going to be the PACS, it could be an EMR, it could be an interface engine, but the actor is fulfilling that transaction, and that profile is getting fulfilled in that instance there.
Yeah. And in a way, the fact that we had kind of went down this kind of actor process rather than calling it a prescriptive name is with the advent of more automated workflows driven by things like large language models or artificial intelligence. This order filler role can actually be fulfilled by like an AI solution. So we're now starting to blow right outside the walls of imaging itself with a lot of what we're doing. So by having these actors, it gives us more latitude as to where to place them.
So I want to go back to when we were starting our conversation, and you had mentioned DICOM as a standard, HL7 as a standard, and so we have those as standards, and we have IHE as a framework. And I've often heard standards define the what, and the framework is going to define the how. And so this allows us to be able to have this clear, how are we going to do it, and we're going to leverage these types of standards. I'm curious if you have any further thoughts you want to share on that.
So one of the words I like most to describe an IHE profile is actually the coordinated use of standards. Not only standards, but as to timing. So coordinating them lets us absolutely define, what system does what and what standard to use. One of the things that an IHE profile, the analogy I've inherited from, IHE leaders before me is when you want to describe an IHE profile and the use of standards, people without having an IHE profile would look at, let's use the analogy of building blocks that your kids would use, Legos. Well, there's actually two systems that are very popular out there, and they are called Legos or Diplo. If you want to look at a red building block, they look very similar.
Mm-hmm.
If you look closely, they're not exactly the same. So what happens when you try to marry all these together? Well, you start getting gaps and you don't have the right fit. It's not fit for use. So that's what an IHE profile, it defines, we're going to use Diplo. And this fits with this fits with this. So it's more of a coordinated use. An IHE profile is not a recipe for a startup or a company that's freshly come into healthcare imaging, in that they can take it and build a solution. It's more of a path, because one of the things we do when we write a profile, technical profile or technical supplement, is we're not too prescriptive. And what you'll see is you have options, but you also have suggested ways to approach a problem or a communication route different in different manners. And a lot of that has to do with what we try to do is bring in, a new functionality or a new way to communicate between systems to achieve a more optimal end state. Is we need to also support legacy systems.
It's funny because in that analogy that you had mentioned with Diplo versus Lego, you could have two vendors going at it, and maybe one leverages Lego, one leverages Diplo. Because you could have multiple standards that are being leveraged or not necessarily prescribed, but whatever is going to best fulfill that use case.
That analogy is great because not only that, so if you're in one institution and you're purely Diplo, everything works fine. Same thing with the other side of the street where you're using Lego, everything works fine. What happens when now you have to build a bridge?
Mm-hmm.
So at one point there's a weakness somewhere, right? So again, it's a simplified analogy, but one that we've inherited.
I'm curious, let's say an organization has identified a specific use case, and they know the how that they want to solve using standards, and what's the process that they would take in order to make this known to IHE, get this to the state where this can be a profile that vendors would validate them?
I'm going to use an example that actually I went through and actually led, and that's about 2 years ago. We published a profile for IMR, which is interactive multimedia reporting. It actually it's been commercialized and it's actually been deployed in several institutions in the United States. I'm not sure if there's any in Canada yet, but it's a rather, how can I say this? unique. And what it does is it delivers an imaging report in a format in a way that is very modern, because the imaging report historically has not changed for over 100 years. People like Chuck Kahn and Chris Langlotz have been hammering away at many radiologists and imagers that we need to change how we report what we interpret as to medical images, and we need to modernize it. Well, IMR really modernizes, because what it does is it promotes the ability for an imaging report to have hyperlinks. And usually the hyperlinks are associated with when a radiologist and an imager describes where the image is. Like let's say a CT. The CT, if they want to draw attention to one specific image where they see a lesion or whatever, or tumor, is they will dictate that it is this series and this frame. So, and those are numeric. So a hyperlink from that phrase can launch into the image specifically. Okay. So what that does is it saves time for whoever's reading the image or looking at the report and looking at the images. By the way, one of the studies we're trying to get to is measuring just how much time do you save when you have to look at prior images. So by going to the report and hitting it, you're going to get launched right into it. You don't have to look for a prior or rely on the hanging protocol. So anyways, this was out there, but what we're finding, we were being told by the institutions that had operationalized this, that they couldn't share this outside their own organization, and they were having problems getting it into their EMR. So a task force working group was established by HIMSIM. It's called Enterprise Imaging HIMSIM, and it was called Multimedia Imaging Reporting. It was rather a long acronym, and we actually shortened it to IMR. And we submitted it to IHE to become a technical profile. It took us 2 ballots to get in. Like, you asked me about the balloting process. So here we are. We have a clinical challenge. We have these beautiful structured reports that has a hyperlink that makes really the job for clinicians a lot easier, because you can hit the hyperlink and it shows the pictures right away. Because we use multiple use cases, everything from prior images, speeding up tumor boards. Tumor boards would have to set everything up. Well, now you can just pull up the image and launch, right? Mm-hmm. So, but there wasn't a standardized technical solution to how to deploy this interoperability wise. It was every one of those institutions, they were using proprietary methods to deliver the hyperlinks. So the HIMSIM working group elevated the profile of IMR. And once we did that and published, we then took it to IHE and we submitted it. So this is long-winded, but I'm getting to answer your question around what is the process. So we submitted it. That year we submitted to the IHE Radiology Planning Committee. We were one of 8 profiles that were being assessed. You have to remember, IHE Technical Committee only works on anywhere from 2 to 3 technical profiles in 1 year.
And just to pause, who is on the planning committee versus who is on the technical committee? Just if you could just differentiate what kind of audience or what kind of participants are there?
The planning committee has a lot more clinical representation. Radiologists, imagers, some administrative people, quite a few vendors. And then the technical committee will have a lot more technical people. And the majority of the technical people are actually vendors. They work for vendors. So a lot of the vendors contribute a lot. And don't forget, IHE is a purely voluntary organization. It's a nonprofit. And, there's benefits to the vendors to do this, because, the companies that are working on this, they bought in that interoperability is actually a necessity. And I think a lot of them are very forward thinking. Going forward, you can't do it all alone, especially again, the advent of artificial intelligence coming. You need to share your data in a way that is more than anything, because data historically in healthcare, we've had a problem with quality of data in both quality of data and data governance. So what I mean by that is sometimes you're not clear exactly what the data you're being presented with, and it has to be clear. It has to be good data, it has to be unambiguous. I've even gotten to, is it accurate and up to date yet? And it's just, delivered in a format that is understandable and exactly in the right context. So let's come back to the process. So in submitting to the IHE planning committee, there's usually that year there was a short list, which means 5 were elevated to the short list based on a presentation and voting by the planning committee. Those top 5 went on to have a more in-depth assessment by the planning committee. When they do that, they look at it and say, how much effort will it take to actually develop this technical supplement or profile for publication? Okay, and then they score it. In that way, if the first year we submitted IMR, it was too large. It was the profile would have taken the whole time, ate up all the bandwidth, and it may not have been finished by the end of the year. We actually, to be successful, we split it in 2. IMR actually became the back end, and it was the front end. IRA is the integrated reporting applications. So that's the front end where you have the voice recognition, dictation system, and then you have the packs and the modalities feeding information in. And also at the same time, we accounted for AI results as well. So anyways, so it gets voted on the short list, and then they get scored on, and then it gets voted again by the planning committee, and then they choose whether it's you're successful for profile development, and then they take about the technical committee works on it for about 3-4 months, gets it to the point where it's a supplement that is released for public comment. Public comment is it's released for distribution to the public. I say public, it's a healthcare public for 60 days. It's, I think IMR got over 300 public comments that had to be resolved. So we took a little longer to resolve. We resolved all the comments. Some of them are open issues. A lot of the issues are closed. All those issues are also communicate with the commenter. And then once it's resolved to the point where it's published, usually midsummer, it's published.
Question about this, about it being published or versus trial. If you go through the hallways of IHE, there's a lot of trial profiles that are, they're not young. They've been around a while. But so why do we see that? Why do we see trial profiles that kind of never take that final step?
A lot of it is because technology moves so quickly. The other is the reason why we aim to have the profile published in the summer, our deadline is before September. The reason for that is historically, the North American Connectathon has happened at the end of January. This coming year is actually the first week of February in Toronto. But again, same time, it's to enable that you take a profile, you get it published, vendors can take it and they can develop their solution so they can test it. Okay. So they test it and they submit to the Connectathon. They're going to participate and they want to test this profile. And then we line up at least 3 vendors. It has to be 3 vendors that they have to test against 2 others. It's not you and then someone else. It's got to be you, 2 others in order to pass. So we have to ensure that there's enough participant to test your desire to test that profile. Once it's tested, it's still in trial implementation until it's actually implemented somewhere. And then don't forget, whenever a profile is published, we're always open to any change requests or corrections or anything like that. And we go through CPs to do that. And that continues even as we get into operations, when people want to say, they've taken this technical supplement and they've engineered and developed a solution according to this profile, and then they pick up things or make suggestions. we save those up, and when it gets to enough implementation, it then goes into final text. So what that means is in trial implementation is it never made it out of testing, or it never got implemented because of the time frame. Sometimes it's just not final text. One of the things that the IHE technical committees have is a shortage of bandwidth. I know that the two most active domains are radiology and ITI. And ITI is continuous. They're on a continuous cycle. Radiology is on an annual cycle, whereas ITI is on a continuous cycle. They just keep churning.
Wow.
Stuff that comes out. And a lot of their stuff now is based on fire. By the way, IHE, the last 3 years, we've also released profiles based on fire as well. So that is accelerating. So fire is a little different, and I like the idea. We need to also now maybe change how we take it out of trial implementation, because one thing about fire is they have a maturity model. Their maturity model is built in with statistics on how many are implemented, and then they get to maturity level 5. So again, there's conversations now on how we can incorporate more of a fire flavor to IHE profiles.
So this has been a good conversation. I'm gonna close it out with a final question here, and it'll probably lead to some other conversations. But you had mentioned Connectathon. I thought this might be a good opportunity for you to mention a Connectathon that's going to be happening in North America this coming February, and it's in our hometown in Toronto. And you've got a lot of work underway, getting ready for a lot of things. So do you want to talk about what's happening there?
Sure. Okay, so even though it is a North American Connectathon, we're calling it the Connectathon Week. And it runs all week long, and it's just not a Connectathon anymore. A lot of this is leveraged from the success that the European Connectathons have had in the last 2, 3, 4 years. And by the way, the European Connectathon is taken on, there's new stakeholders. Historically, IHE has been named at the vendor community in order to help them facilitate accelerating development of their solutions for healthcare, digital health. What's happened in Europe is jurisdictional governments, like entire national governments, have now started to adopt the IHE process. In other words, they are now stipulating as part of their RFP requirements that this shall have these profiles or this testing or whatever. And that's another thing that we're leveraging for the Canadian Connectathons coming in Toronto in February. Is we're really trying to get jurisdictional governments. So with that, there's been a lot of work around patient summary in Canada, as well as developing a new fire standard called CAFX. So we have the Connectathon. We also have 2 other streams that are technical streams. And that is we're calling it a Pan-Canadian Projectathon that is specifically going to test for CAFX, which is fire standard for exchanging data in using fire and fire resources. So it's a tremendous opportunity for jurisdictions if they're working on solutions to come. Because don't forget, we have companies that are attending and they send their engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hoping to get close to 400 engineers in Toronto in early February. And they're working on, mainly the Connectathon, but they're also accessible for the Projectathon as well as a Plugathon. So there's 3 technical streams going on. And there's a very regimented discipline one called the Connectathon. There is one that is sort of has goals, and it's called the Projectathon, aimed at Canada. And don't forget, we're going to have guests from Europe as well as the United States. They're going to want to test their flavors as well. So we have some planning to do around that. But the main reason we're bringing it, InfoWay has put their support behind bringing it to Toronto, is we want to test the patient summary and other things that are Canadian related. And then the final technical stream is the Plugathon, which means we really want to bring startups, small vendors, as well as the large vendors to play.
Mm-hmm.
Come in. We have all these engineers, and we want to make use of that time because, one of the values of an IHE Connectathon is the ability for engineers to solve problems at an accelerated rate. I heard time and time again this has saved us so much time because they get to talk to someone that is a lead on this solution or whatever it is, with whether it's Epic or Cerner, or it could be Siemens.
It is really incredible when you're in the room and it's the engineers, it's not the salespeople, and all of a sudden it's not about what company business card you have. It's about solving these problems. It's
How do we make it work?
yeah.
And then there's other activities too. There's two other things I just want to make mention of. One is there's experience days. And again, we the experience days are anything from, it's really aimed at people that are new to IHE and what it can do. Everything from jurisdictional accountability and how do you use IHE artifacts to ensure you're successful from a business and governance point of view, as well as people that are new to fire, and how do you there's over 40 something profiles that are based on fire. Now bringing in the fire community and trying to get them, how do we work this out? And then that's the master classes as well. So those are aimed purely at people that want to have a little bit of introduction. So we call them master classes. And then the experience days are talking about, hopefully we'll have some of the European government representatives to share their success stories as well. And then part of the experience days will say, jurisdictions, show us what you've been working on and what you're successful at. So yeah, it's going to be a busy week.
I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun. Unfortunately, it's in February in Toronto, but yes, it'll be good. It'll be fun. Well, thank you very much, Dave. This has been a blast. I could spend all day talking about interoperability. We'll let it go at this.